In just a couple of weeks, myself and a good friend are headed to Uganda to film a documentary at an orphanage. It's not for an organization or through an organization. We're not getting paid for the trip. The trip's not getting paid for, and I'm filming with someone that I've never even met. So why am I going? I want to start by sharing Derrick's story with you. Derrick is the individual who runs the orphanage that we're going to be filming at in Uganda, and his story is absolutely incredible. When he was a young teenager, he attempted to end his own life by taking a handful of pills. He ended up passing out under a blanket and was found by one of his family members several hours later. In his culture, trying to end your own life is very taboo and can bring dishonor into your family, and so his family exiled him. He was sent out to live on the streets and essentially abandoned by his family. And for the next decade, he lived on the streets of Kampala. He slept in latrines and washrooms and just out on the streets. He was homeless for 10 years on the streets of Kampala. One day, the owner of the latrine that he had been sleeping in, just this roof that he was able to have over his head, decided to lock the latrine and locked him out. All of his stuff was in there. He had kind of lost everything again at this point. And he's starving. He's absolutely famished. And so in his culture, if somebody shows up at your door, you feed them. And so he remembers as a kid going to this church service, and so he goes to the pastor's homes. They invite him in, they feed him, they give him a meal, and at the end of the meal, they ask him to stay. They let him stay in their house, and he stays there for an entire year. And after that year, in a way not to kick him out, but a way to just help him get back on his feet, they ask him what he wants to do with his life. And his response is start an orphanage. So obviously, Derrick has a great story, a very impactful story, very powerful story. But there's lots of great stories. There's lots of great stories in my city. I don't have to go to Africa to tell a good story. But that isn't just about telling a good story. See, in a lot of ways, my life experiences, my struggles with the church, my experience raising a kid from the foster system, the time that I've spent working with the homeless communities where I live, all of this experience gives me a really unique, a very different perspective on Derrick and his story. And so in some ways, I have a lens to see Derrick's story that other people don't. That doesn't mean I'm the best person to tell his story or the most equipped, and that doesn't mean that someone else couldn't go in and tell an even better version of Derrick's story. I think those are all very true things. But I think in a lot of ways, the story has come into my life, and I have this obligation to tell it. As we've been organizing this project and trying to get it to a place where we can actually pull it off, we've been asking ourselves two questions. Why Derrick's story, and how committed are we to making this project happen? These questions have really served as our North Star, especially in moments where we still have fears and doubts and uncertainty about making the project happen. We don't even know if, when we get there, if we're going to be able to pull off shooting a documentary and bringing content back that we could actually make a film with. There's been a lot of sleepless nights, and there's a lot to this. As a creator, I feel like I have to let my heart bleed a little bit. I've been super blessed for the last handful of years to be able to make a living off of being a creator. This is my primary source of income, and I get to use this to feed my family, and that is an incredible blessing. But I have to remember why I got into this in the first place, because it wasn't to make money. I got into creating and making documentaries to tell stories. So what about Derrick's story drew me in? Prior to being a full-time creator, I worked in the nonprofit world, specifically with faith-based nonprofits and churches. And through that work, I've seen and continue to see some absolutely beautiful things happen. I've seen people who've struggled with 20 plus years of addiction completely renew their life. I've seen families that haven't talked to each other in a dozen years restore relationships that they thought were completely broken. I've seen some absolutely incredible things happen. But I've also seen some absolutely terrible things happen. I've seen leaders of organizations make morally compromised decisions for the sake of profit. I've seen People fall through the cracks of organizations because that organization just simply refuses to be organized. You know, these places that are supposed to be refuges, beacons for the broken, I've seen these places do the most harm. I've seen people scream, "Love your neighbor as yourself," in the most hateful ways imaginable. And these aren't just anecdotes. Like I've been there, I've seen this happen. I've been hurt by these places, and I know people who have been hurt. I know people who right now are hurt because of events that have taken place in the last handful of months. And these things frustrate me to the core. But then I look at the early church, the church of the first century, and believe it or not, they're not known for protesting abortions in front of Planned Parenthood. They're known for going to the outskirts of the city where families would leave babies and infants that they either couldn't afford to take care of or they didn't want to take care of. And they would pick up these children, they'd pick up these babies, and they would raise them as their own. They would adopt them into their families. And this is Derrick. All Derrick has are his hands and his feet, and he sees these orphans who look like him, who have the same story as him, and he asks, "How can I help?" So in the middle of all my struggles with the church and all my questioning, I meet Derrick. Like right in the middle of all this, I'm introduced to Derrick, and I see him walking out the gospel and living out the gospel in the most authentic way I've ever seen. He doesn't wait for someone to write a check. He doesn't form a board of directors or apply for grants. He just sees these kids and he asks, "What can I do? I can start an orphanage." He's doing what every Christian is supposed to be doing. He's taking everything he has, his time, his possessions, and he's giving it to the poor. And this is just so countercultural to how our Western minds work. And it speaks into so many of my fears and my insecurities and my questions that I have, that I just need to tell this story. And that's why I said yes. So, how committed am I to making this thing happen? Well, we bought tickets. And when I say we, I mean myself and my very good friend, Ryan Unger.
Good.
If you hang around my Instagram page at all, you've probably seen Ryan. He's been in a bunch of my recent reels. He's a very good friend of mine. He's an incredible photographer, creator, and traveler. He's been all over the world to do this very sort of thing. And he's not coming on this trip as like a second shooter or a travel companion. Ryan is very much an equal on this trip, and I'm very blessed to have him along. So we've booked tickets and hotels and hostels. We've made connections with people on the ground. We've got most of our gear ready to go. We're going and we're shooting. But that's really only half the game. Once we get there and film and get back, we have to actually make something out of this. We have a story to tell. And that's a frightening task. It's really a tremendous burden to tell somebody's story. As a filmmaker, if you take on this task of telling a person's story, you really only have one chance to get that thing right. Once you send it out into the world, there's no redacting it and saying like, "Oops, I messed up here, I gotta fix that." You have to really get it right. And so we only have one chance really to tell Derrick's story. And that's a big part of why I'm making this video, is I would like the community, I would like you guys to help hold me accountable, not just for making something, not just for putting something out, but something that's authentic, something that's beautiful, and something that represents Derrick, his story, and this orphanage that he runs in the most incredible way that I can. Truly, I'm honored to be telling Derrick's story. Really, it's a blessing to us to have this opportunity to go to Africa and tell Derrick's story. And our hope with this film is that we can bring more recognition to what Derrick's doing, and that we as a community can help Derrick in his orphanage in a way that respects his culture. So stay tuned for some more updates. Next week, I'm gonna be posting an update on the equipment that we're gonna be taking and a little bit more about how we're actually going to be filming the documentary. So thankful for the kit that I'm taking on this trip. It's drastically different from the kit I took to Costa Rica, because that was a nightmare, and I'm really excited for how we're set up, and I'm honestly just so thrilled to be getting this trip off the ground and getting to Africa. So I'll be posting some vlog style content as we're going through Africa, and I'll be absolutely certain to post some updates once we get back. And if there's anything else you wanna know, please drop it down in the comments below. I will happily answer any questions. So, till next time.